who would be on the bottom. And of course, the demand, as I said, is a much broader framework for coexistence until the creation of the idea of citizenship in the 18th century from the Enlightenment, which introduces the idea of the equality of all citizens, which is a quite different story. So you can't compare the DEMA with modern ideas of citizenship. It has nothing to do with that. And the DEMA is also, they had a lot of restrictions. For instance, they could not, their temples could not be higher than or more visible than the Muslim temples, than the mosques. Their religious celebrations should be indoors. They should not display wealth. They were forbidden to use a lot of fine or rich tissues or to exhibit wealth. They were forbidden to ride horses. They had to ride donkeys, so they would be visibly inferior to the Muslims. Of course, throughout Muslim history, these kind of restrictions were forgotten or were very, very rarely enforced. So actually, from the outside, you could not really distinguish a Muslim from a non-Muslim just for the way of dressing or the way of riding a horse or a donkey or having wealth or not having wealth. And non-Muslim communities, they prospered under Muslim rule. But in moments of moral or political crisis, of course, these restrictions were awakened and they were enforced in several times. For instance, during the Crusades, the Christians, the Crusades, they tried to conquer Aleppo. They never conquered the city, and they killed the population around. They killed the whole population, the Muslim population, in the fields around Aleppo. So the Qadi of Aleppo decides that the Christians could not live within the walls of Aleppo anymore. So they expel all the Christians to outside the walls, and all the churches that were inside the walls, they become madrasas. They were taken as Muslim waqf. So, of course, from time to time, those non-Muslims, they were subjected to the possibility of being to having this restriction enforced on them, especially in moments of moral and political crisis, when the state had to more or less show the society that it could uphold the Muslim moral and social order. And of course, the Ottoman Empire inherits the framework of the DEMA and changes it a bit. So under the Ottomans, it is created a system called the millet, which is more or less like the DEMA, but a little bit different because it becomes not only juridical statutes, but also an instrument of governability. So both Muslims and non-Muslims are organized into millet. So you had a Muslim millet, a Christian millet, and a Jewish millet. And as I said, it was not only juridical structure, but also political and administrative structure. So those millets would be self-ruled, so the churches would govern the Christian population. The rabbis would govern the Jewish population, and of course the muftis and ulama would govern the Muslim population. And all this was organized into a hierarchical structure that went right into Istanbul, Constantinople, where the Grand Mufti would control the Muslim millet, the Grand Rabbi would control the Jewish millet, and the Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople would control the Christian millet. Of course, this was much more an official ideology, an image that the state created for itself and projected into society than what you could see in local realities. Because, of course, not all Christians would respond to the Orthodox Patriarch. And not all Muslims would be connected to the Grand Muftis, to the Grand Mufti in Istanbul. As you went down into this administrative scale, into local realities, you could see a quite different situation. For instance, groups that traditional historiography would deem as heterodox or outside the limits of Sunni Islam, Shia, Alawis, the Druze, and this group, usually they have a more or less mythical memory of unending persecution under the Ottomans, but the reality in the archives, in the documents, show a much different picture. All of them, they were incorporated into local administration. So in the mountains of Syria or Lebanon, Druze and Alawi tribal chiefs, they were the local powers, and they responded to Ottoman authorities, despite the fact that officially they were outside the range of Sunni Islam. The same thing you could say about Shia in the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala. They were incorporated into the local notability, and they were used by the Ottomans as local structures of governance. The same thing, the Maronite Christians, who would not respond to the Orthodox Patriarch in Istanbul, they were incorporated in the Lebanese mountain as part of the local administration. And this also has to do to the fact that the Ottoman, as all pre-modern empires, the Ottoman Empire was much more interested in taxation than in cultural or individual governance. The Ottomans were interested in the collecting tax from territory that they saw as valuable. Deserts, mountains, and other territories that could not produce a lot of tax to be sent back to Istanbul or to Constantinople. They were more or less left to the local powers. So that's why the Ottomans were very eager to accommodate with these religious groups and these religious structures that were outside their own millet system, their own idea or their own ideal of what should be the moral order of society. And on the other hand, the Ottomans were very wary of any kind of religious movement that could defy their own claim to absolute representation of Islamic power on earth. So, for instance, when Wahhabism appears in the Arabian Peninsula, the Ottomans, they send a series of military expeditions to destroy the power of the Wahhabis in the Arabian Peninsula, despite the fact that you're talking about Sunnis who presented a very puritanical idea of Islam, etc. So for the Ottoman power, those people were much more problematic than Alawis or Druze or Shia in religious terms, because of course for them also was a problem of religious claims for absolute religious power, which under their eyes was, of course, a monopoly of the Ottoman Sultan. But of course, from time to time, also the Ottomans tried to normalize these populations that they normalized in religious terms, the populations that they incorporated into their administrative network, or at least that they accommodated with. So throughout the 18th and 19th century, there is a series of campaigns of the Ottomans trying to force Alawi notables to build mosques in the Alawi mountains in order to create at least a landscape, a religious landscape that would represent what, would be coherent to the ideal of the millet system that they promoted. Well, so this was more or less the relationship that the Ottomans had with religion and religion plurality. It was an Islamic empire with the legitimacy of the holder of power, of the Sultan, was related to the fact that he was the guarantee of upholding this Islamic morality into society, or Islamic social order. And within this Islamic social order, there was room for non-Muslims to coexist and to live in society. And also, of course, a lot of room for groups that could be seen as heterodox Muslims or something like that. So there is another debate that rages on Ottoman history, is about the tolerance or the intolerance of the Ottomans. And again, as in the case of the Dima, there are pages and pages and pages about how tolerant the Ottomans were and how all religions, they could basically flourish under their rule. And of course, pages and pages and pages written on their persecution of non-Muslims, or persecution of heterodox groups, or persecution of Shia and other forms of Islam. And again, as in the case of the Dima, I think the truth lies elsewhere. I think actually the term tolerance is meaningless, more or less. What is tolerance? What do you mean by tolerance? Is liking and loving the other, or simply allowing it to exist, or allowing with some restrictions, or allowing until you decide not to allow to. And again, an empirical example might help. After the 18th century, there is an effort by the Catholic Church to reconquer the Christians of the East. So there is a lot of missionary work done by Franciscans, especially, in the whole of the Ottoman Empire. So of course, they could not preach to the Muslims. I mean, the conversion of a Muslim outside of Islam is forbidden, was forbidden. But they could preach to the Christians. And they were very successful. So large groups of the Orthodox Church accept the authority of the Pope, and they become what we call the Uniate churches, the Melkite Church, or the Armenian Catholic Church, or the Coptic Catholic Church, or the Assyrian Church, or the Chaldean Church. They were all former Orthodox or non-Chalcedonian churches that basically split into a group that remained Orthodox and a group that accepted the authority of the Pope. So it became officially Catholic. And it's interesting to see that in this case, conversion was not done individually. Were usually priests who accepted the authority of the church, and their congregation would become officially Catholic. And there is a history of because of why this happened, but then I'll go for that later on. And of course, the Orthodox, they had to pay the jizya. And the jizya was calculated on the total number of Christians of a certain locality. So the Orthodox had a problem. They had less and less followers, and the jizya remained the same. So they had less resources to pay it. And actually, sometimes they had to sell churches or sell church property to pay it. So in the middle late 18th century, the Orthodox Bishop of Aleppo writes to the Pasha, asking the Pasha to stop the missionary work of the Catholics, saying that they are robbing our followers, they are robbing our Christians, so please stop that. And the answer of the Pasha, I think, reveals the actual dynamics of how the Ottoman state saw the existence of the non-Muslims under its control. The Pasha answers, how to say that in English? The kufr is kufr. Disbelief is disbelief. I don't care about its content. So stop bothering me, basically. So I don't care. Christians are Christians. They are not Muslims. If they're Catholic, if they follow the Pope, if they like the Virgin Mary, I don't. It's not my business. I can't interfere. Not only I can't, but I don't want to interfere into theological problems of the Christians. The Christians sort by themselves their problems, and please pay the jizya. And of course, the Orthodox Church had a lot of privilege because it was the official interlocutor of the Ottoman state, but of course, it was seen that sometimes this privilege had some backfire, as in this case. So instead of talking about tolerance, I would say that the official position of the Ottoman state was a kind of benign indifference. They couldn't care less what the Christians were doing or not doing, if they pay their taxes correctly and they follow, of course, the social order. And we can see in the case of Aleppo, the Christian population in Aleppo in the late 18th century and the beginning 19th century become very wealthy and becomes very numerous. It grows in size and it grows in wealth. And of course, there was a lot of complaint about the Christians showing off their wealth and actually breaking the rules of the Dima and becoming more bold in their presence and their visibility in the public sphere. But usually, the Ottomans would ignore all these complaints. These complaints would come from Muslims, of course, from the muftis of Aleppo. And the Ottoman state would ignore these complaints as it ignored the complaints of the Christians about missionary work that was disrupting their own communities. But in the 19th century, new dynamics start. And there comes, of course, the colonial enterprise of the Europeans, which was not new, let's say, and was not in the beginning fully colonial. Since the 16th century, the French king was recognized as the official protector of the Christians of the East. Because, of course, the Ottomans and the French under François Ier, under Francis I, were allied in the Mediterranean wars against the Italian cities, against the Spaniards, and etc. So there was a series of treaties between the France and the Ottoman Empire called the capitulations. And at that moment, a capitulation was just a treaty, which recognized that the French king had the status of protector of the Christians in Ottoman territories. At this moment, the Christians in question are the pilgrims. The European pilgrims going to the Holy Land would have protection from the French king. With time, Christian populations, not only in the Ottoman Empire, but also in the Safavid Empire, would invite the French king to become their protector. So there is a letter of the Armenian community in Isfahan asking Louis XIV to become their protector. And this letter is